China's vaccine industry has recently been rocked by scandal after the country's second-largest rabies vaccine producer was found to have falsified production and inspection records. Public fear has grown. People's trust in China's healthcare companies deeply shaken. The government has taken action. Changsheng Life Sciences has been fined $1.3 billion and the company's chairwoman arrested. Plus, draft legislation has been introduced in an effort to get to the root of the problem. But what caused the corruption in China's vaccine industry in the first place? Why do Chinese parents see Hong Kong as a safer place to go for vaccinations? And can the new vaccine management law provide a shot in the arm for public confidence? Well, to discuss these issues and more, I'm joined in the studio by He Jing, an attorney at Undier Law Firm, and Harvey Zodin, the Senior Fellow for the Centre for China and Globalization. So that's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Jeff Moody. Let's start with you, Harvey, if I may. What exactly did Changsheng Life Sciences do wrong, in your opinion?
They falsified records. They used outmoded materials. It appears they colluded with the regulators or with government officials to falsify information. And this isn't just like soap powder. We're talking about lives here. We're talking about serious diseases. Rabies invariably kills if not caught in time, and it's a painful death. So it's right that the chairwoman went to jail, and it's right that the government is introducing legislation to try to deal with this problem.
But only 5% of vaccine batches are actually checked for effectiveness, aren't they? Because there's this big rush to get them out. That was half the problem here, wasn't it? That there wasn't enough checks in place.
Yes, the part of the problem is that you have a situation in China, as you have in some other developing countries, that you have the fox guarding the hen house. And what do I mean by that? I mean the regulators do not have enough trained personnel to check adequately. So if 5% is spot checked, that means that 95% still has the possibility of going awry.
He Jing, this substandard vaccines in China are legally considered inferior drugs rather than counterfeit drugs, aren't they? I mean, we may be talking just semantics here, but it does feel very different. It's not a counterfeit drug, it's just an inferior drug. Are you surprised by this?
Not totally surprised, right? And the Chinese law, they were designed to deal with a different kind of offense. And when they're looking at the counterfeit drug, it was presumed to be a more serious, more important. But when it comes to the vaccine, when they talk about the substandard, I think the legislator have this rationale. The jurisprudence is that, well, substandard does not mean it will automatically, it does not necessarily generate the kind of serious harm as those counterfeit drug would produce. That's why, from the perspective of legislations, they have the sort of different scale of a penalty to match the seriousness of the harm. But now, when you're looking at it, when you look at that vaccine, now people realize, hey, this is wrong, right? Substandard vaccine that's put into actually the body of children, and could have a very long-term effect. So I think this kind of a public crisis now sort of really shaking up the awareness of the public. On the other hand, I think there are a lot of researchers, that still pending researchers, really following, hey, what are the harm of the substandard, the vaccine? The scientific proof is probably also being produced. It's as far as I know, I'm not a scientist about this, but as far as I have heard, that it's not a very easy thing to get scientific proof to really see that, hey, how to quantify the kind of harm of substandard vaccine. But I should just emphasize, I think the crisis is really more on the confidence of the whole system.
Yes.
You know, when you talk about the children, now whatever you do that, even though, hey, maybe theoretically the harm may not be really grave, but that's really affect the confidence about the whole system.
And there's a history here as well, isn't there? So you've had problems in China with poison toothpaste, poison milk, poison baby food, etc.
People were going to Hong Kong in their droves, weren't they?
Exactly.
Just to get their babies
and Hong
fed.
Kong had to limit the amount of purchases of baby formula, for instance. So once this problem has been created, I think it's very difficult to undo this perception of maybe, is this fake, is it poison? And it's not somebody just out there, but it's your child, your parent,
right.
Your grandparent, whatever.
You're right, it's a three-pronged thing, isn't it? Because it could damage your health, it could prevent, it could not do the job that it's there to do. You know, you could end up with rabies when you put yourself in a situation where you could get rabies when you thought you were protected from it. But it obviously affects the public confidence as well, which is obviously, you know, a huge thing at the moment. 14 company executives and staff members, Harvey, were detained. Some of them were released, but some of them were not. So this isn't just one person cutting corners. We can't just lay this at the door of the chairwoman, can we, of the group?
Not at all.
This feels like mass corruption.
It's a systemic problem that's been uncovered here, and I believe as long as there's huge profits to be made, that people will continue to take a chance. Although the proposed law does, in fact, have very strict penalties, and also for private litigation, punitive damages. But I think that, and I'm usually a liberal, but on this issue, because it affects people, I believe that in this case, you don't kill the chicken to scare the monkey. You go right to the monkey and kill the monkey.
I mean,
so I would make
it
a capital offense, because I think you only have to use it once for people to be focused. Otherwise, it's just a matter of money, and it's a matter of a risk-benefit. Can I get away with this? Because if I can get away with it, I can make a lot of money.
I think one of the things that probably relates to the industry policy. In fact, if you think about it, so many vaccine factories. If you think about it, it's not really right. It's not really right. For vaccine products, which directly link to the public health, and you want to offer the product at a very affordable price, right, to everybody. Even though the government also gonna do a lot of procurement to buy a lot of vaccines to make it free for children, okay, in lots of places. So you want actually you want a much smaller number of factories, very high production, high quality production. You have the scale of the economy. Then make it at work. They've got to have the best techniques, right? The best production equipment, and then you have this tight, the monitoring, the whole system. Then make it at work. Otherwise, when you have the multiple smaller factories, it's going to make it very hard. If it cannot be so commercial, if they run this, if the smaller private enterprise run this kind of a vaccine business, and also have to comply with all the government pricing, that's going to be hard. I think one of the things that needs to happen yet, there got to be some big consolidation in terms of the industry. And then plus, then adding in this is a very tight the enforcement system, and also the very high deterrent, the enforcement system, then probably can change the system in a more fundamental way.
Is there a case for having these companies state-owned? Would that help?
State-owned, it's not just state-owned, right? Business is business. Even though it's a state-owned company, and they still need to look at the P&L. So there's got to be a scale. Right now, we know in China, it's not just a vaccine. If you look at the pharmaceutical industry, in China, the huge number of pharmaceutical factories. Last time I heard is around like 4,000 or 8,000 generic companies around the country. Almost maybe every county. Right, they want to set up their own pharmaceutical factory, so the local factory can supply the drugs to the local hospital system. Okay, that's a way to make the profits as well. But that's caused a problem. So I'm actually really thinking, in China, for all the pharmaceutical industry, including the vaccine industry, they need to have a significant consolidation. You need to have a much bigger company or facility to make the vaccine.
But it's not just about profits, is it? Because this particular company, Changcheng Life Sciences, it invested only 7.9% of its annual revenue into research and development, whereas a lot of companies invest around 25% into that sort of that sort of area. Does that surprise you, Harvey, that it invested so little?
In a way, it's more than a lot of pharmaceutical companies in China invest. The 10 leading pharmaceutical companies in China only invest 1% of sales in R&D. And the top worldwide pharma companies invest about double what this company invested, so about 16%. So they're somewhere in the middle. The problem is, while Chinese people like to gamble, they like to go to Macau and Las Vegas and so on, pharmaceutical companies and many other companies don't like to gamble, so they want a sure thing. In America or in Europe or Japan, a lot of the money that goes into R&D goes down the drain because the research process to approve drugs with clinical trials and all this, there's many more misses than there are hits.
Well,
and I think Chinese companies don't want to put that money in.
Well, for all the pharmaceutical industry, there's always a distinction called originators and versus generics. Okay, there's a bunch of, most of the generics don't spend enough on the R&D. They basically take those expired patented drugs, right? They make the generics. So it's a little bit of the business model. But I do agree that when you're looking at the vaccine factory, they are supposed to be the national champion. Okay, they're a listed company. They have the facility. They supply to the large group of people in China. They're supposed to really invest a lot more of their profits in the R&D so they can elevate the quality of the production.
When it comes to this particular company, and I want to broaden this out in a minute to look at the industry as a whole and to look at the government's response to it. But when it comes to this company, do you think, He-Jing, that the punishments that have been meted out on these individuals is sufficient?
I think that's sufficient. Okay. Now, the ironic thing for all the enforcement is the punishment is punishment, right? What's more important is what's next. How you gonna, if you shut down, the whole purpose is not to shut down the whole factory. Even if you shut it down, you need to come up a new factory, or you make sure the current facility in some elsewhere can meet the demand in China. In fact, if you look at the background, it was an accomplishment for China to come up to build the whole vaccine industry to supply all the vaccines to the children, and it's actually made enormous achievements in the healthcare system. But however, when the system stopped working, and you come up with this horrible crisis, it's really a shame. It's really a shame.
Harvey, you were saying that you're no longer as liberal as you're known to be. There's been calls on Weibo and other social media for the death penalty for cases like this.
I'm for it.
You're for it?
I'm for it. I'll tell you why. Because I think that's the ultimate deterrence. I think any money fine or any medium or short-term prison sentence is not enough, because the amount of money, potential money involved is so great. Some people are going to be tempted to take the money and run and take their chances of being caught. But I think, like we used to say in America in the 19th century, there's nothing like a rope to focus a person's mind. And I think you need that deterrent of capital punishment. I honestly think you only have to use it once for people to pay attention and to get with the program.
What would have to happen before this happens? Would certain people have to die? Because He-Jing was saying earlier on that we can't quantify how bad some of these situations are, because we haven't got a death toll in front of us, so we can't say, well, as a result of this, it's caused these numbers of deaths. We don't necessarily know. So where do you draw the line? Is it when any company has been found to have falsified information, or is it when there's a proven death?
I believe for this ultimate penalty, capital punishment, death penalty, you'd have to have a proven death. Now, I worry, because China's still a developing country, that it's not doing as good a job as some others in terms of record keeping and public health numbers. So if you look at the numbers of people who have flu in China, for instance, it's a very low number for a population of 1.4 billion. And the amount of deaths are laughable. They're very, very few. But in America, where people pay a lot of money for health care, where 45% of the population gets flu shots, for instance, you still have hundreds of thousands of people going to hospital. You have thousands of people who are dying. And so there's a disconnect here. I think in order to make good policy, you need good numbers. And I don't think the data in China is where it needs to be.
Okay, Harvey Zodin and He Jing, for the moment, thank you both very much indeed. Let's take a quick break, but we'll be back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. We're talking about China's vaccine industry scandal, looking at what can be done about it and how we can restore public confidence. This one's for you, He Jing. It's fair to say, isn't it, that this has rocked the nation. It's fair to say that parents up and down the country don't know where to turn. They know that they need their children vaccinated. They know that the health and the safety of their children is of paramount importance, but they don't know anymore where they can go to get it in a way that isn't going to harm their children. That they're rushing to Hong Kong to try and get things there, which is putting huge pressure on resources in Hong Kong. I'm not exaggerating, am I, when saying this is a major blow to parents up and down the country?
Of course. It's, in fact, it happens especially when people thought the system was cured to some extent. You know, I think early on, Harvey talking about the food crisis from the drug safety crisis a few years ago, okay? And it was that really horrible. And China actually did quite a few big things, including set up a specialized police team to deal with the drug safety cases and the food safety cases. So we thought that the things were sort of under control. That's why when this vaccine problem came up, that's really suddenly brought back all those horrible memories. People thought, wow, that's big. It's a very bad surprise, especially when you thought that things were taken care of. And now this happens to the children, right? Even though, you know, it's just a substandard, even though it's a falsification of records, I don't think we have seen fortunately, seen the real cases of like a death, right, of children out of this. But it's just shaken up, really impact on the confidence. I mean, that's the crisis for the confidence.
Now, on November the 11th, the China State Administration for Market Regulation published a new draft of this on vaccine management. I believe you read it, and it's a lengthy document.
It is like 100 articles. I actually was pleasantly surprised by the details of this new draft. It has 11 chapters. It's really cover almost every part of the whole manufacturing, the vaccination, the immunization, the liability or strict liability, how to taking care of the people who receive the vaccine. So it's very comprehensive. And actually, to some extent, I thought they sort of mirrored the U.S. law. I think the U.S. passed a law in 1986 called Child Injury Act. That legislation was said to be the critical piece, to be the foundation, right, the vaccine system in the U.S. as well. So when I look at this, I say, wow, you know, I have to say the ministry did a fairly good job in terms of the drafting.
But Harvey, of course, the trouble with too much regulation around these things is it hampers people's ability to do their job. Your president talks about it quite a lot, you know, the fact that, you know, too many regulations, too much legislation that people have to adhere to makes it very difficult. And one of the reasons this scandal happened in the first place was because they were trying to get the drugs out quickly. Do you see a case of this happening in China when pharmaceutical companies can't act in a way they would want to act because they've got so much legislation to rely on?
You know, this is a matter of balance between market forces and government regulation. When you're dealing with people's lives, you cannot allow industries that are profit-driven to regulate themselves. So you need this sort of Damocles hanging over their head. So have to have a balance. And I believe that this kind of regulation requires a heavy hand by the government. Yes, the cost of it is innovation. Yes, the cost of it is people are going to say, I don't want to engage in this business because there's too many rules and I'm I'd rather not get in trouble, so I'm just not going to do it. But when you're dealing with public health and safety, you have to go the extra mile or kilometer in this country to make sure that people are protected. And I believe in the draft legislation, although it's not available in English and I have to go by news reports, that there are still steps that can be taken which will make this law even tighter. And that is leaving everything that's there, but building in a few other elements. Maybe the key element is to both protect and reward whistleblowers. In America, one of the best institutions that we have now, and it's incorporated by law, is to have whistleblowers. So people usually on the inside who know that something wrong is going on, and at great personal risk to themselves, even potential risk of their life, they're willing to report these things because they know the consequences. I don't think this law provides for, protects, or rewards whistleblowers. I think it should be in there.
Jing, they're talking about people being able to sue these companies.
Right.
Do you think that would work? Do you think that's a way forward?
It's the private enforcement, we call private enforcement, the private litigation. That's normally secondary to this kind of cases, okay, in terms of preventive remedies. Of course, it helps, right, for the victim to get the compensation from the bad guys, from the victory. But it does not itself is not really sufficient to deter the bad acts. But of course, the private litigation always helps for the victims.
We were talking earlier on about supply and demand, and then there not being enough of these vaccines available. We know that there's a shortage of flu vaccines in the country at the moment. What do you think, Harvey? Because neither quality nor quantity of vaccines is satisfying domestic need at the moment, is it?
It's not satisfying it at all, even though Chinese consumers historically have used the flu vaccine very little. In my country, about 45% of people get it. In your country, about 2% get it. And still, there's not enough supply. So it's clear that market forces aren't working. So several things have to happen, and none of the choices are good. Yes, you could raise the price, and then more companies would come into the market. But then fewer consumers would be able to afford it unless the government were willing to pony up larger supplies of money. So it's really, I think, a problem without any unique solution.
Yeah, I think under the current situation, the government has to incentivize or maybe have to ask some of big pharmaceutical factories in China to really make a heavy investment in this area to make a new facility to make the vaccine. It's a fact. It's true that Chinese people, at least when I grew up, we just did the vaccine like when I was a child. But when I grew up, I rarely even think about the flu vaccine. It never really appeared to me that's even an option. But now when the awareness of the healthcare awareness really grows, people realize, hey, if I can get a flu vaccine, I can take care of lots of trouble. That's why the demand is growing, and then the government has to match it. But under this new law, with all the deterrence, the problem is that, hey, people may be scared, the investors. So the government has to do something much more proactively.
And it's not just the flu. Let's look at the HPV vaccine.
Right.
Now, this can protect against cervical cancer. It's finally been approved for sale in China after almost 10 years, but there's no Chinese drug company that is able or willing to produce this vaccine. Why do you think that is, and how do you think we can change it?
That's actually something I think our country should really be ashamed about. Okay, there's something very effective for women's health, but for ridiculous, I don't know what exactly the regulatory barriers. There must be, quote unquote, the legal reasons to prevent the factory to make this. But it's really a shame that China did not make this available inside China until recently.
Harvey, do you think it's a shame that no Chinese company can produce this at the moment, or is willing to produce this?
Yeah, absolutely, because the potential demand is great. One study that I saw said that in the next 2 years, the there will be 26 million Chinese consumers who want this virus, 26 million women. So there's definitely a demand that's there. And I hope, you know, we talk a lot about Made in China 2025. And President Trump doesn't like it, but we like it because it promotes innovation. And I certainly hope that healthcare is a part of Made in China 2025 because the industries need to be encouraged to innovate. They need a little kick or they need some help. And healthcare, it's all about life and death. And what could be more important than that?
I think the current government definitely get the message, you know, especially after our President Xi had this big agenda, healthcare, like 2025. There's a big agenda. And now the agency moves so much quickly, so to make sure the HPV, the vaccine actually being allowed to import into China.
But how can the government actually make companies invest their technology, invest their resources in producing these vaccines? You earlier said that the government should ask people
the companies
to work, ask the companies to work on creating these vaccines. What else can they do? Can they tell them? Can they encourage them, induce them with financial reward?
I think the central government, central government and local government can give the incentives, you know, tax incentives or the local infrastructure incentives to attract the investment in this particular area.
So finally, has this done enough, do you think? Let's ask you this one, Harvey. Has this done enough to restore public confidence? We've now had a severe punishment heaped upon the people involved in this particular scandal. We've seen the President himself describe this as abominable, and we've seen this draft legislation coming into place. Has this done enough to stop hordes of people crossing to Hong Kong to get their medication?
No. In one word. Because people are so used now to having all the scandals we discussed earlier in the program that just the legislation or just the fact that some people are in jail or just the fact that people are fined, it's not enough. And so it's going to take a long time to restore confidence.
Okay, on that note, thank you very much indeed. He Jing and Harvey Zodin, thank you both very much indeed for joining me for that debate. And that's it from me for now. Plenty more still to come on CGTN, so do stay tuned. And don't forget, you can catch up with us online, cgtn.com, and all your favourite social media. We're there on WeChat, we're there on Facebook, Twitter, Weibo, the lot. But from me and the team, bye-bye. Thank you for your company.